Welcome, my friends, to the Quay Radio Hour, your home for free and critical thinking, and I'm your host, Mike Williams. And joining me for this segment is my blog partner, Al Williams. Tonight, our friend Robert Morningstar returns to the show. Robert is a civilian intelligence analyst and psychotherapist in New York City. He received a degree in psychology from Fordham University. He's an expert in Chinese language, history, and martial arts. He's an FAA licensed pilot and instrument ground instructor with 23 years of flying experience. Robert has studied the paranormal and UFOs for over 40 years and has published many research articles exposing the government cover-up and deception in the JFK assassination. For tonight's show, which is part one of a two-part interview, Robert will talk to us about the secret space program as he shares his research and thoughts regarding the moon, alien existence, and Mars, which he believes might very well hold the key to understanding the true origins of humanity. And so without further ado, here's Robert Morningstar.
So those pictures.
Yes, the pictures.
I sent you some amazing photos I've never released completely as a set before. And did you see my interview with Carrie Cassidy?
I haven't. I downloaded it to watch it. Yep.
Because I touched on the subject of the alien moon base and the subject of my having learned Chinese and my curiosity about a particular character. And you see that character on the bottom of that flying saucer in the UMO photos that I sent you.
Right.
That character struck my mind. I saw it first around 1969 or 70. It started to come out and it was in a couple of books, and I get really curious. Then I started studying Chinese because it looked Chinese to me, you know. There's something about it. Let's look Chinese. But what's it doing in Spain? So when I started studying Chinese, I was ready to ask the teacher, hey, what does this character mean? And before I asked the question, I was in class and he started writing and teaching us how to write Chinese. And he drew the word for listening, to hear. And it's a character that's an ear. It represents an ear, like this.
Right.
The ear. So they draw two lines like that and like this, the opening of the ear. It's rectilinear. So that's the first. It refers to the use of the ear. And then the second part, to means to listen, he drew two characters. And one was, on the bottom was the word. And the top one, he drew that character. Before I had a chance to ask the question, he just drew three horizontal lines and connected by a vertical. And I saw it and I was really surprised. And I was about to say, hey, what does that mean? Before I got the word out, he took the chalk and he drew a circle around the whole character, making it look like that photo of the UFO, right? And he says, oh, by the way, this here is the sign of the king. And when you have a circle around it like this, it means the king of the world.
Interesting.
Yes. And now you have the pictures. It's on the bottom of the UMO UFO. UMO was a Spanish UFO cult that said they had contact with extraterrestrials. And they have several photos. They all have, the ones that show the bottom have that character. Then I found the moon base with those characters. It's the same one. And then I gave you one picture of the Roswell I-beam. And that character's on there too, the king.
Okay, yeah. Now, Robert, these pictures, are these your pictures or did you source these from somebody else?
I got the UMO. Most of them come off the internet.
Okay.
You know, I did searches and people send me things, but I've been downloading. Some of those were pictures that I downloaded from Roswell TV specials or the Roswell film that I was part of the Roswell investigatory group that was about 7 people that really concentrated on the Roswell crash, the Roswell autopsy. And in the course of that, when I saw the film, there's a black and white film of a fellow holding the beam and he's going like this. It's very glary, but because he rocks it, it goes across and you can make out all the characters if you have like 5 frames. And then it's the same film where you have the 6-finger imprint, you know, the control panel.
Yeah.
It shows a hand print where they put their fingers and it has 6 fingers. It's the same film as that. Okay. So I captured these frames from that, from moon studies, and the UMO myth, the UMO legend of the Spanish UFO cult.
Okay, so and then Robert, you did the secret space program,
Mm-hmm.
and you had mentioned to me we had a previous call about I guess about 2 weeks ago,
Mm-hmm.
and you had said that there was an awe-inspiring moment when the crowd took
Oh,
took
yes.
a collective wow.
Yes, that was at the very end. I edited the lecture because, as I've told Carrie, we had a couple of technical problems on stage. The sound wouldn't work, and I couldn't show the films. But in the course of it, I would say, hey, I'd like to show you this film from the original Flash Gordon, or I plan to show you this. So after I did it, and I got through it, I showed the best things, and the main things that I went to show, the towers and the Apollo UFOs and so on. But I didn't get to show the films and the actual films. And so I've edited the documentary, the lecture, cut out all the walking on stages and the glitches, and just inserted where I said I'm going to show you the people that got us to the moon. And so I was able to edit it. I had the first showing here in New York before the New York Disclosure Group. It's a UFO and contactee group here in New York that I've known for 5 years. And when I showed it at the very end, I saved the best for last. So when I showed the films of Apollo 17 and Apollo 16, the moon racer, for example, that was the moment where 30 people in this auditorium watching this special screening all collectively went, "Whoa, whoa!" And I laughed and I said, "Boy, that is a really nice sound to hear. To hear of to hear the sound of collective surprise and delight and fascination. It's a wonderful sound. Sounded like a big hum of a beehive."
Yeah. And Robert, how much work does it take to ensure that the photos that you come across that they haven't been doctored or photoshopped? Because it's some of the Photoshop work out there is just amazing.
Oh, I know. Well, I try to rely on old black and white photos that have a history. And even then, there's a famous photo of purportedly the crashed flying saucer at Roswell a few years ago. I came across it, and then I came across one that showed bodies lying on the ground, and the bodies that were on the ground were obviously the same ones that were in the Roswell autopsy film. So I started studying it, and I found out later that a Japanese calls himself a ufologist, but I don't call people who hoax UFO photos real ufologists. His name is Kenjiro Mori, and he said a few days later that he had contrived the photos to see how quickly a false meme could be spread on the internet. But while he was putting in these fake bodies in one section of the photo, I noticed that in a section of the photo he didn't notice was the figure or the face of the alien is in the corner, the edge of the photo. So while he was trying to manipulate the photo and punching in little photos, photoshopping in the body of the alien, specifically the one with the burnt leg in the autopsy, the right thigh is exposed and looks charred and burned. He was putting that one in, but he didn't notice the face of the alien in the upper left-hand corner. And it was kind of like half of a face, or almost 60% of the face. It was kind of like this.
Okay.
So I was able to take it and enlarge it and mirror it. And my goodness, it's a very, very amazing discovery. And I wrote an article for the old UFO Digest, which was called "The Face of the Alien Revealed," as it was revealed as well in the last 2 seconds of 2001: A Space Odyssey. I've also done articles on that. And that one took me 40 years to see because, so what, let's see, 2001: Space Odyssey was around 1969 that I saw it. It may have come in 68, but I saw it after the first run. And like everyone else, I was transfixed by the ending. Fantastic music, Also sprach Zarathustra by Richard Strauss. And then the moment when the Star Child is revealed, there is that moment, the climax, where the Star Child goes from profile and slowly turns to face you. As that's happening, remember how quickly it fades out? And everybody's left wanting more, wanting more. Why? Well, 40 years later, about 2009, I rented the video and I played it again as an anniversary thing. And I was standing right there, looking at close-up big screen and enjoying that last moment and remembering how it changed my life. And I'll tell you how it changed my life in a second. But as it faded, I saw something that shocked me to the core. And it was this. As the Star Child turns, there's a shadowing effect that happens. And for one moment, the inner shadow dominates the picture. And that black shadow with the big eyes is the face of the alien. So unbeknownst to all of us consciously, Stanley Kubrick was working with NASA to reveal to us the presence of alien artifacts on the moon, pointers to Europa and the moons of Jupiter. But at the climax of the movie, he actually shows us, subliminally, he shows us the face of the alien. And the implication is that we are hybrids, because it shows a human baby turning in the fetal position to face you, and then it's a human baby with the alien inside.
Okay, yeah.
You have to study that, and you have to freeze it, and you have the skill. I would recommend that you capture those last few seconds, Mike, and put them in the video and freeze it just before the lights go out. And that was the wickedest tease, I had to go back again. It was like, oh my God, I'm going to have to pay $7 again to see that 2 seconds. And I went. Now, I'll tell you why this is so important to me. At that time, I was involved in, I had been in Army ROTC at Fordham University, but then the whole space program came aboard and Apollo 8 went to the moon. And so I switched over to Air Force ROTC because I wanted to be an astronaut. And I'm sitting in the theater when this thing happens, and I've spoken to you before about how I have this inner voice that speaks up to me. It's not my head, but it's something that comes up from my gut and my heart, and it talks to me, and my head hears it, and it said to me this. He went through the Stargate, he went through the metamorphosis into the Star Child, etc., and the voice says to me, yes, Robert, you can get there, but you can't get there in a rocket ship.
Interesting.
And what it was saying, and the message, the unspoken message, was psychology. So on that day, I changed my direction from astronautics and Air Force ROTC to psychology, remote viewing. I had always had that skill, by the way, remote viewing, which is the reason that I had gone into, I went into psychology in the first place, but this was a complete, full commitment to parapsychology, because what I had just experienced was a parapsychological event. This inner voice speaking to me and telling me, well, yeah, you're going to go there, you can get there, but you can't get there in a rocket ship, meaning this is a mental, a psychic journey,
right.
Quest.
But
I've never regretted it, by the way.
Well, let me ask you this, Robert. Kubrick's films, I mean, they're known to be encoded. So what was going on? What was he doing? I mean, clearly, in my view, there was a lot of stuff that was being kept and held back, not told to the public. And he was essentially putting it out there, but he was putting it out there in a very stealth way. If you paid attention, you would get the clues and you'd figure it out. But what was going on was, did NASA, here's my question, I guess. The Apollo missions, did they actually go to the moon with the equipment that they showed us, with the transports that they showed us, or did they take other technology up there and with Stanley Kubrick's help, did they show the public a whole different, almost like a TV show? In other words, here, you watch this, but we're going to be up there, but we have different technology.
Let me just put it this way. I do believe we went to the moon. I do believe that we landed the LEMs, 6 LEMs landed on the moon, and that we went with our technology. But we knew something else was up there already from the lunar orbiter photos, the several lunar orbiters and other probes that we sent to the moon were taking pictures for many years before we decided to actually go there. Actually, we decided, but we were taking pictures. As to where we landed, that's a very interesting story. All the landing spots were chosen by an Egyptian man. I guess you'd call him an astronomer. His name is Elbaz, and he's kind of like an Egyptian priest in a way, because he knew all these quote-unquote sacred sites and the places where they landed. The star Sirius, and representing Osiris, was in a significant point in the sky. A lot of people don't know that on the Apollo 11 landing, the Apollo astronauts conducted a mass in secret with the Holy Sacrament and so forth. So the astronauts themselves, Buzz Aldrin in particular, and Neil Armstrong, were both very high-ranking Masons, but in return from the moon, Buzz Aldrin relates the secret ritual ceremony that they had, a mass, basically, a sacrament, and Eucharist, but that it was kept secret because of the protest that was made over the Apollo 8 reading of Genesis when it went around at Christmas time, 1968, which was one of the most exciting things that I've ever experienced, was Apollo 8 making an orbit or several orbits of the moon and returning. And then during that Apollo 8 mission, one of the astronauts communicated back to Houston saying, Houston, please be advised that there is a Santa Claus.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a joke. And I felt it again in the gut. I said, whoa, I know what he's talking about. So the UFOs were tracking, watching, harassing, buzzing. It's funny, Buzz Aldrin.
Yeah.
Buzz Aldrin got buzzed by UFOs, and he got pretty shaken up, Buzz Aldrin was a colonel, and, you would think that a man who braved such a hazardous journey and came back would have been made a general. But unfortunately, because he had some psychiatric problems adjusting to having to cover up what he had seen,
right,
he had to have some therapy, psychotherapy. And as a result, that's considered a blight on your record in the military. And no generals are ever appointed who have had, psychiatric counseling and psychotherapy. So that killed his star. But he's now talking a lot. Buzz Aldrin is coming. He won't talk about the moon. He won't talk about the moon at all because they're all sworn to secrecy. But when you get him talking about Mars, man, the man lights up. And he starts talking about the monolith that they found on one of the moons on Phobos, the moon of Mars. There's actually a monolith right on top of it, exactly like the one that was depicted in 2001 Space Odyssey, except it's on a moon of Mars, not the moon of Earth. So getting back to Kubrick, I think Kubrick was used by NASA to leak important information to the public on part of it's on an overt level, but what I'm talking about, the face of the alien at the very end, is on a subliminal level. And it was part of a long train of films that the CIA and the National Security Agency have used for 50 yease to acclimate humans, particularly Americans, to this idea that we're not alone. While saying we're alone, we haven't found anything, they have to prep the public. They have to create a repository in our subconscious minds to be able to receive this information. And the way, this repository, I liken it to that little game that we used to play as kids, and they come in various shapes, a little box with ball bearings in it, and you roll them around and try to get them into little hollows so they fit. Well, before the sphere can settle and fit, you have to carve the hole in the cardboard for it to roll in. Otherwise, it's just going all over the place, right? So that's my analogy for what CIA, NSA, United States Air Force have been doing for 50 plus years. They've been creating little hollow receptacles in our belief systems. Don't believe it yet, but leave a little space in there so that when the right ball bearing gets flipped, it'll go whoop, blimp. Oh, I get it. So that's my take on Kubrick. Kubrick had the complete cooperation of NASA in doing 2001: A Space Odyssey, and more importantly, Mission to Mars with Gary Sinise. It's a very important film, because I've told people, I wrote in 1996 or 97, I wrote a long article called The Four Faces of Mars, expounding on my theory that certain segments of the human race are hybrids. And a lot of us are taking this for granted now, knowing the vast amount of experimentation that's being done by aliens who abduct humans. So it's not as far-fetched now to believe that in the ancient past it was also happening, and as borne out by the records in the story of the Anunnaki in the Sumerian stories, and the stories in the Bible about angels and human women crossbreeding to produce giants, etc. So this idea that we are part alien is not so far-fetched now as it was 50 years ago. So my thesis in the Four Faces of Mars, it's called the Martian thesis, by the way, is that the human race evolved on Mars first, and a cataclysm, an astronomical cataclysm, either asteroid impacts of incredible magnitude devastated the planet, or a cosmic war between Mars and another planet that existed between Jupiter and Mars, known now as the asteroid belt. In ancient times it's called Marduk. This was the name of it. Another name for it is Lucifer. So this fallen angel idea could be this fallen planet that scattered meteor showers and asteroid showers and bombarded most of the planets in the inner solar system. And so I believe that the ancient gods of Egypt, Isis, Osiris, Seth, Anubis, and so Hathor, all of these were part of what I call the Martian remnant. That the Martian, certain part of the Martian population survived long enough to escape the cataclysm and settle in different regions on Earth. And wherever they settled, being so far advanced and coming down from the sky, they were taken to be gods. So the Egyptian gods, the Anunnaki, the story of Viracocha in South America, the gods of the Incas, they were also sky gods. The gods of the Japanese believe that their emperor is descendant of one of these star people. So this idea is scattered across the world, and I believe that, as Joseph Campbell wrote in Myths to Live By, there was a moment in the book where a third grade school teacher asks her class, "Does anyone here know what a myth is?" And one little boy, Johnny, raises his hand and he says, "Teacher, I know what a myth is." And she says, "Johnny, really? You know what a myth is? What is a myth?" And he says to her, "A myth is something that's true on the inside but not on the outside." And in that one sentence, you get an insight into the purpose of myth.
Right.
And if you read Fingerprints of the Gods by Graham Hancock, you'll get the same message. Myths are a convenient container to transfer very important, essential information from one generation or one civilization to another, generally in a nonverbal form that contains the essential information in such a way that it will not be corrupted in its transfer. So the simpler the myth, the more effective will be the transfer of the important information that's encapsulated in the myth. So, with regard to the myth that I've just described, my Martian thesis, my idea that I am part Martian is not so far-fetched anymore. Considering all the discoveries that have been made in recent years through DNA studies, including the discovery of another matrilineal line, Woman X, the Denisovan hominid, as opposed to Lucy. So there are at least two strains of human races on this planet, one that evolves from the primordial mother, Lucy or Eve in Africa, but there's another race, species, you might say, subspecies, that has devolved or evolved from another matrilineal line which was not human. Woman X, the Denisovan hominid, apparently was not human, and the Melanesian people today are the remnant of that line. Apparently it also crossed with the Hobbit, the Homo floresiensis. And it turns out, according to the most recent theories, again, this discovery of this fossilized finger in Siberia has given rise to a tremendous new information. And there's one theory that the Caucasian race was spawned by a crossing of Neanderthal with proto-hominid. And it's considered that Neanderthal was not human. You know, people thought that there was the proto-hominid, and then there was the missing link, and then Neanderthal and Homo sapien went off this way. They used to think that Neanderthal came down the same line, and now they found that Neanderthal came down one line, Homo sapien came down this other independent line. There was a crossing, and the offshoot of that crossing was Caucasian race. And Russians have done a lot of studies in this realm because the finger was found in Siberia. And they've concluded that all Caucasians have Neanderthal genes, and no Africans have Neanderthal genes. So this is a big breakthrough, and it's something that's very controversial, and I've known about it for 5 years. It's been percolating for more than 5 years, and with my contacts in New York, with the American Museum of Natural History and other scientifically oriented bodies, I heard about it, and they were saying, they don't know how to tell the public. This is, why? Because it just rocks science and evolutionary theory right down to its foundations.
Well, from my perspective, we have been lied to about just about everything. And so the discoveries that they're coming across now, my view as the research I've done is that all of this history is known by a select group of, you can call them whatever you want to call them, the cabal, the controllers, the puppet masters.
Initiates.
The initiates, exactly. So it's not a mystery to them, how we evolved, but, they've got us on the slow path to figuring it out. And that's so that they can maintain their control. So it's really unfortunate that this is the way the world operates, but it is how it operates.
But the movies are a very important medium for the dissemination of this information. I want to go back to Mission to Mars. That while NASA denies the existence of a face on Mars or any of these theories that I've just proposed, they worked wholeheartedly with the producers of Mission to Mars, the film with Tom Robbins and Gary Sinise. And if you see that movie and just concentrate on the last 15 minutes of the movie, where the astronauts searching for this lost group of astronauts or for previous colony wind up at the face on Mars. And then there's an opening, they go inside. Now, when they go inside, they enter a room that's a hologram, a holographic history of the solar system. And as they walk toward the planet Mars, the astronauts are there, you see Gary Sinise, and he's almost reaching some gesture toward the planet. All of a sudden, right under his armpit, hits this asteroid, and then another asteroid hits, and then you see the shock wave wrapping itself around the planet, destroying the ecosystem. And suddenly you see all these spaceships rising up above Mars and flying off toward a particular star in mass. except at one moment when you see the goddess appears to them, Isis, obviously, in symbolic form. She appears to them in the room and she shows them this history, and she shows them how she took a sampling of Martian life and put it in a spaceship and directed the spaceship to come to Earth and fall into the ocean, split open, and all of life then starting to propagate and evolve on Earth. It's a very beautiful ending to a really fine film, and it really just puts unofficially, it shows that NASA unofficially has come to the same conclusion, unofficially to us, officially to them in-house. Mars was destroyed by asteroid impacts that cracked the planet, nearly split it in two. The asteroid impact that hit just south of the Valles Marineris, that's the valley, Mariner Valley, that stretches the equivalence of San Diego to New York, and 18 miles deep, huge, miles wide, a lot of chasms, and that was caused by the asteroid impact that hit in an area called Solis Locus. And Solis Locus is a very interesting area, and it is so deep that the sunlight doesn't reach the bottom of it until at least 10:30, 11 o'clock in the morning. Imagine that. You have a planet that was hit by an impact, and it's got a cavity like this, right? So the sunlight comes across this way, and the sun starts to rise, but this area is all black, and that's called the Eye of Mars. And it was seen by Percival Lowell and other astronomers for years, and they didn't understand what it was. When I saw Mars in 2003 through a very high-quality telescope, at the time that Mars had come to Earth, closest to the Earth, closer than it had in 60,000 years, I saw the Eye of Mars, and I saw in two glances, one on the 27th, the other one on the 28th of August. I was stunned. I saw this thing, and it scared the hell out of me. It looked like Alice Cooper's eye. You know Alice Cooper?
Yeah.
The black tear?
Yeah.
Exactly what it looked like. And I felt like an eyeball was looking at me out of the sky through the telescope. And when I saw the destruction, the cataclysm, the magnitude of it, I felt fear in the pit of my stomach, that it's reminiscent of the story of the astronomer who discovered Deimos and Phobos. He said he'd been studying Mars, and all of a sudden one night he saw two moons orbiting it, and he felt fear and terror when he saw it, and that's why he named them Deimos and Phobos, fear and terror.
Okay, yep.
So we're all scratching toward the truth, and little by little, NASA leaks a little here, a little there. But this pattern was the pattern of leaking, gradual time capsule release of information. This was described in 1965 by Frank Edwards, a reporter who wrote Flying Saucers Serious Business. And I saw him live on WNEW TV, Channel 5 in New York, on the Alan Burke Show. And he said the most interesting things. He said that he had contacts with the CIA, and the CIA contact had told him that this is so earth-shaking that people really aren't ready to handle it. And so the general public, or the world public, has to become acclimatized to this idea that we're not alone, and that there are more intelligent or higher intelligent beings around us that have been here in the past and may still be around. But there has to be a gradual acclimatization process to get people kind of comfortable with that idea. And he said this. He said, there's a whole new kind of film going to come out in the next few years. Movies like you've never seen before. And these movies will be a change in direction, because up to now, and he was talking about 1965, he said in the 50s and even now in the 60s, most of the films that you see, science fiction films, are the monsters from outer space, evil, threatening, menacing aliens. The change is going to come early in the 1970s. You're going to start to see another kind of film where the aliens are not depicted as monsters and slightly more benevolent and perhaps more intelligent. And it will happen in 7 cycles of 7 years. In these 7 years, this technology, these new kinds of movies that are coming out, will present these ideas to the public gradually. And each 7-year cycle will have a particular theme working toward open disclosure. So he said 7 times 7, that's 49. Right? So 49 and 65 gets us to 2014. That was a big year last year.
Yeah, because I remember reading that there was going to be a concerted effort throughout starting in the 70s to come out to acclimate the public to the fact that there are extraterrestrials, interdimensional stuff like that, and that all bleeds into even all the documentaries you see. And I think the biggest proponent of that, and I know the CIA is probably all over them or intertwined with them, is the History Channel. Mm-hmm. Starting back in the 90s, History Channel and Discovery Channel, they started rolling out documentary after documentary about UFOs. And I don't know if I should know this. I've been looking at this stuff for long enough. I think the name of the project to roll it out in the 70s to people to get them acclimated, I think, was Project Aquarius. Back then, that was all part of Project Aquarius, was to roll this out to the public.
Right.
But I know part was to roll it out in documentary form.
Mm-hmm.
Give a little bit of real information, give a little bit of disinfo, which is what they always do, but just enough to get it out there so people know what's around them.
Right.
But the History Channel is the biggest proponent of that. Because,
I agree. I really would like to know who those people are.
UFO Files is one show. I mean, there was a show they did back in 2006 on UFO Files showing you, hypothetically, how would the propulsion system of a UFO work, and they spent 2 hours on this.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and I remember that episode.
Yeah, and they got into great detail for something that was hypothetical, and I'm watching it, I'm like, yeah, I don't think that's really hypothetical, I think. I think it's their way of telling you that, at least one form of UFO they may have, or acquired, or backwards engineered. That's how it works,
that was a fine show.
I'm not saying all of them work, but there's definitely a concerted effort behind those shows, all those documentaries.
But just to give an example, when I was growing up, I was leaving school early on Thursdays. They let us out because they had other kids come in for religious education. So they would let us out at 1 o'clock, and I'd take my quarter and run down to 52nd Street and 8th Avenue, where was this Tivoli Theater, and I would get in to see these movies. And there was I Married a Monster from Outer Space, Plan 9 from Outer Space. Now, that's an important film. You know why? If you study the movie Ed Wood, you find out that was financed by a group of Southern Baptists who wanted to tell this story. And what does it tell? It tells a story of a kind of vampiric aliens that are abducting people in the Los Angeles area and doing some kind of mind control to them and turning them into basically zombies. And the interesting thing is that the aliens are portrayed as Russians, So there is this element, that the Russians and the aliens are kind of similar. So they got this actor named Tor Johnson, T-O-R, Tor Johnson, to come out and be the really horrible, monstrous alien killer. And he was a facsimile of Nikita Khrushchev. See, so I look at these movies now and I can see, oh yeah, that guy was Khrushchev. And you know what? If you know the Twilight Zone episode, To Serve Man, where the alien comes and he's got this book and he's getting a bunch of humans to go to their planet.
Yes.
Trying to translate the book To Serve Man at the end. He's like, no, don't go. It's a cookbook. Well, the alien in that movie, played by the same guy that played Lurch years later, if you really look at him very closely, you'll see that they took an actor who looked like a twin of Malcolm X.
Oh, okay.
Compare.
Yeah, I'll have to compare that.
Get a picture of the alien in To Serve Man and compare him with Malcolm X. So there was this whole thing happening, this manipulation, psychological manipulation, implanting fear, anxiety, mistrust in many different ways, and using science fiction to do it. Now, the change in science fiction movies from monsters from outer space to kind of maybe Space Brothers, I cite the movie Robinson Crusoe on Mars as one of the turning points of in that genre. If you recall, Robinson Crusoe on Mars, an astronaut goes to Mars, and he's the only survivor, and he's got to survive. And in his quest to survive, he finds a cave, but he also finds that there are mining operations going on Mars. And he sees that humans are being enslaved by an alien race to do the mining, and they all have to wear these collars, and the collars keep them under control. So he rescues one of these human slaves in the mining, and he becomes his man Friday, and through him he learns more and more about the domination of the aliens over humans and the enslavement of humans to do the mining of some mineral or some product that they require for their survival on the moon. And then I spoke about this in San Francisco. In the 1950s, I remember a movie called The Mysterians, really great 1957 Japanese science fiction movie. And the theme of that movie was aliens on the moon coming down and abducting women and taking them off to the moon for fun and games and procreation. And so I think they were dropping hints as to what was really going on. But doing it in symbolic forms and warning us, alerting us, preparing us for this eventual revelation that is occurring even as I speak.
Yeah, I think some of the heavy hitters, the obvious ones, is the day the Earth stood still, right?
Right, which is a very fascist movie, you know. I look at I look at it with very different eyes now. That and The Shape of Things to Come, you know, the 1930s one. We were always on the side of the guys that were firing the space gun and progress. Yeah. And that amazing speech by Sir Cedric Hardwicke, who then later played the Pharaoh in the Ten Commandments. He's the one who stands up and he says, "Is mankind never to rest? What is this progress? Progress. We have become slaves of progress. Is man never to rest from this?" And so they make him look like a fanatic, but he's really giving people some common sense. You know, he's talking about why do we have to sacrifice young people, sending them into outer space? So I hear him with different ears.
I think even stuff like Star Trek, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, Close Encounters supposedly was based on a true story, an incident that took place in 1964 at the Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico, supposedly.
Yes.
E.T. was a huge one, basically to make it nice and cutesy for people.
Gremlins.
Yeah, Spielberg is big on the inside as far as even Star Wars, George Lucas and stuff. The more recent one that lays it out pretty, it's not even like, it's not even vague. I saw some movie, Transformers Dark Side of the Moon.
Oh, I missed that one.
Yeah, that was basically that. The whole premise of that was there were bases on the moon. Mm-hmm. We went there up in the 60s. We found them, and we tried to hide it and try to suppress it. Mm-hmm. And whoever was up there or what was up there didn't want us back.
One of the most entertaining science fiction films of recent years that I missed when it was in the theater. You know, it came and went, and everybody really ignored it, including the critics. But it's a very good movie called Iron Sky, the director's cut. You can get it on Netflix. And it's the thesis is the Nazis on the moon, that Nazis really did escape and established a base on the moon, and that they were planning to come back and reconquer the world. Not necessarily, they didn't necessarily go to the moon, but it seems to me like the Nazis, more and more as I look at the world today, it seems like Nazism did win World War II and just got a bunch of frontmen to cover their victory.
Yeah, well, then you get the Project Paperclip and everything else.
Exactly.
Mind control.
Robert, if we go back for a second, we talk about the incremental conditioning. What came to mind is even the pictures that they show us of Mars, right? Mm-hmm. Everything was filmed with an orange-red lens, you know? and now what I'm seeing is as the Curiosity rover is sending pictures back, what's happening is little by little over time, those
Yeah.
pictures are changing and evolving, and they're no longer looking like, just everything is red or orange. They're
Looks like
starting
Arizona.
yeah,
It looks like Arizona.
exactly.
And here's
Maybe they
let me
are
share
in
something.
Arizona.
Let me share something with you. Why do the people of Arizona, New Mexico, and southwestern Colorado, why do they congregate there? It's such dry, barren land. It's such a hard environment in which to survive. Why do they love it so much? Sedona, Taos, Dulce. I have this gut feeling that those are people who feel like me, that they belong in that terrain because it reminds them of their home planet, which is Mars. I've never seen anything that looks more like Mars than certain areas of Arizona and New Mexico. And the other thing is the building of the Great Pyramids. As I said before, I referred to the four faces of Mars. I've concluded that the Great Pyramids were built there in those three forms to point us to a particular thing in the sky. And there's a lot of red granite, red marble used in many of these structures. And so my take on it is that they're pointing to the planet Mars. And the intelligence that built the Great Pyramids, the Great Pyramid of Giza and the other two pyramids, had the intention of pointing us somewhere, and that somewhere is Mars. And knowing that when we got smart enough to get to Mars and see it from outer space, that we would recognize something. And what I recognize is that the three pyramids of Giza represent the three volcanoes that are known as the Tarsus Montes. The Tharsis Mons volcanoes, huge volcanoes which lie just to the west of Solus Lacus and lie to the southeast of Olympus Mons. Now, the reason I came to this conclusion is I came across a book on the Great Pyramid that had some surveyors' maps drawn up in the 1800s by the expeditions of Maspero and Piazzi Smith, the early Egyptologists. And there was one surveyor's drawing that showed the pyramids in a large size, but then he had contracted the western area so that it would fit on this piece of paper. So the western area was in miniature and the pyramid was in scale. And when I looked at it, I said to myself, my God, this reminds me of someplace on the planet Mars. So then I thought of the pyramids and the mountains of the Tarsus Montes. And I went and looked, and I saw that the western part of this sketch, this surveyor's plan, looked like Olympus Mons. Now, here's the key to this whole thing. When I was a little boy, I used to read Greek and Egyptian mythology all the time, Greek mythology especially. And we were really into the Olympians. I read about Alexander the Great. And I remember, I can see it in my mind's eye now, Classics Illustrated, the story of Alexander the Great. And at the end, Alexander dies of a fever. And in the end it said, Alexander's body was taken and buried in the home of the gods. It's buried on Mount Olympus, where he resides with the Olympian gods. So 50 years later, I start studying Mars and all of these myths and Egyptology, and we find that the Greek gods were really Egyptian gods that got Greek names applied to them. And it turned out that in 1994, they found the body of Alexander the Great. And for 2,000 years, 2,300 years, they'd been digging through Greece, through Mount Olympus, looking for Alexander's body, Alexander's tomb, because the legend said he was buried on Mount Olympus. So, of course, the Greeks were looking on the Greek Mount Olympus, but they didn't realize that the Greek Mount Olympus is named after the Egyptian Mount Olympus, which lies to the west of the Great Pyramid of Giza complex, and it's a holy mountain called Al-Wajid. And at the base of this mountain is a small town called Siwa. And this town has a reputation for healing waters and miracles that happen because of the sacred waters that come out. So I started studying that, and I asked some Egyptians what Al-Wajid means. So I happen to have a lot of friends here in New York and all races, nationalities. So I went to see my friend Omar. I said, Omar, what is Al-Wajid and what is Siwa? So he explained to me that that's a resort that people go to get healed by the waters. And I said, well, I'm interested in what this means, Al-Wajid. And he says, Al-Wajid, well, that means I have found it. I have found it, like Eureka.
Okay, yeah.
So I have found it. And it turns out that that is the Egyptian Mount Olympus. That was the home of the gods, right across from the Great Pyramids. And in this area that I say looks like it was terraformed, like a Japanese garden, as a facsimile of this Olympus Mons region of Mars. And the reason is that to the west of the Great Pyramids is the deepest depression in the Mediterranean. It sinks down 450 feet below sea level and then rises up as an escarpment, a mountain range that separates it from Libya. And the highest point of that escarpment is this mountain, Al-Wajid, which is the original Mount Olympus. And so this is where the body of Alexander the Great was found in 1994.
Okay.
He had been taken, his body had been taken there and buried as an Egyptian god because the Egyptians priesthood recognized Alexander as one of these demigods. And he was initiated as a priest in the Egyptian religion. He was initiated as pharaoh. And then he went on and conquered all the way to India. But wherever Alexander conquered, he would take one of his generals and leave him as a satrap, a governor or a king, as like the Ptolemies. And so he would have them marry also. He would have them marry a royal princess. And so he would create a royal bloodline in every nation that he conquered, and including Persia, where some traitors murdered the king Darius, and they presented themselves to Alexander as if they were going to be rewarded for murdering the king of Persia. And Alexander said, no, only a king can kill a king. And he condemned them to death for having killed his
Interesting, yeah.
his nemesis. But
Right.
he respected the office. I guess he was protecting himself. It's not a good example to let assassins go around killing kings, because if they kill that king, who's going to be the next king they're going to knock off if they got away with one then another? So that gave me proof positive that this mountain in Egypt, Al-Wajid, is the original Mount Olympus, because, as I said, since time immemorial, the legend said that Alexander the Great was buried on Mount Olympus, and they never found a single bone of Alexander in 2,300 years of looking in Greece, but they did find his whole body in Al-Wajid, in the little town of Siwa.
Well, obviously, the Egyptian culture and the Greeks and Greek mythology is heavily tied to NASA. I mean, just look at the names of their missions. And
Yeah. Well, look who chose the landings on the moon. Farouk
yeah.
El-Baz. His name just came back. His full name came back.
Their mission patches.
Mhm.
Greek mythology is also intertwined with Freemasonry too, obviously. So, and Freemasonry is also intertwined with NASA. So there you go. So,
Well, who's Apollo?
yeah.
Apollo is the sun god.
Mhm.
And interestingly enough, Stonehenge itself seems to have been built to the god Apollo.
Yeah.
So Apollo's
It's
a
our
very
line.
important fellow. He's a very important fellow in whole of Western civilization.
And then one thing about the pyramids too, I forgot what interview it was. I was doing with Mike and someone else. It might have been Jordan. There's been a lot of talk about those pyramids were there way before the Egyptians. And
Yes.
the Egyptians just kind of inherited them.
Right.
They were just there.
Mm-hmm.
And they're built on ley lines, as most important structures throughout the world are built on ley lines, including Stonehenge. And so to have that type of information, to know the ley lines going across the world, and especially to know even the way the pyramids are built, the measurements.
Oh yeah,
has a
I
lot
was
of ties.
discussing this last night.
Has a lot of ties with the sun, the measurement of the sun, the moon, the Earth itself.
Precession,
So,
the sun
yes,
precession cycle, the
yeah,
base of the pyramid, the diagonals of the bases of the pyramid sum up to equal 26,000
yeah.
100 years. The precession cycle.
Mm-hmm.
The mass of the pyramid is in proportion to the mass of the Earth.
Yep.
It's situated precisely at the center point between all the land and all the water. I think that we are all getting to the bottom of it, the mystery.
I think they're trying to hide the fact that we do have, and we have communicated with, or we know how to communicate with, if you want to call them either extraterrestrials or interdimensionals.
Mm-hmm.
And through some people call them fallen angels, like you get into the King of Solomon, you get into
Or the Nephilim.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And you get into the Kabbalah with that. If you're talking about Solomon and his communications with the fallen angels, like I said in a nutshell, I think it all comes down to the fact that we know there's interdimensionals, extraterrestrials. Certain people have gotten some very valid information about how the nature of reality works. Have gotten some information about how to manipulate reality or matter. Do you think that's basically the bulk of the information that the elite have that they're trying to keep under wraps? That's like the big chunk of it right there? Or
When you asked me that,
secret societies,
when you asked me the question, the first thing you said, sum it up in a few words. We are the Martians.
Yeah.
That's it. That's what I believe. We are the Martians, and we have a special kind of DNA that's like a time capsule, and it's being triggered. It's when you put the right. It's like Alka-Seltzer, you know? You take the Alka-Seltzer, it's a real solid thing, and you drop it in the water, the reaction starts, and it starts to release the energy, and then you have a glass that's clear. Well, our DNA is effervescing, and I think that it's a time capsule that is designed to release the knowledge directly to us.
Yeah.
And I say this to people, that I come upon knowledge. I know something. I don't know how I know it, but I know it. And then I engage in a process of discovery, of finding the proofs. And that has been my method of discovering so many of these things. You know, you get the so-called hunch that people don't believe in anymore. And it has led me to a lot of really fascinating discoveries and proofs. So, in a nutshell, I think that the thing they're trying to hide is that we are the Martians. At the same time they hide it, they tell it out explicitly. Go see Mission to Mars and watch that asteroid go under Gary Sinise's arm and blast the planet, and watch Isis showing the astronauts how she, the goddess, brought life to Earth and nurtured life on Earth so that the Martian remnant would survive. The other thing about the gods as they came down, they became underworld gods. And why? Because the atmosphere was more hostile to them. Being from Mars, if I'm correct, the Mars is much farther away from the sun than Earth is. So it is a bit dimmer and quite a bit colder. And so the Martian remnant arriving on Earth, so much closer to the sun, the heat would be fierce, especially in a place like Egypt or the Middle East. And so they would have to seek shelter by going underground into darkness. And so this idea of chthonic, you know, the word C-H-T-H, that's a cool word, C-H-T-H-O-N-I-C, chthonic, how do you say it? Chthonic, the chthonic gods emerged. That's where the priesthood had to go down into subterranean vaults to be able to communicate with them, because they weren't able to come out to the surface for probably hundreds of years, until some kind of interbreeding had occurred and some kind of hybrid Martian human could come out of a cave to become a demigod and be able to survive and thrive in the sunlight of Earth and the heat of Earth.
There's a lot of information coming out now, Robert, about this whole, I'm seeing more and more articles, I should say, about subterranean civilizations.
That's another part. This is a very important part.
Yes.
The cohabitation of the planet Earth by perhaps a reptilian biped that has vied with mankind for dominion in the earth and has successfully kept itself hidden from us. You know, I have this idea that a reptilian race could hide itself from us seems far-fetched to people, but I have a vivarium over here, and I have 3 South Carolina anole lizards. And these guys change color so rapidly that sometimes I just can't see them. They'll be on a piece of bark, and I can't see them until I change my angle, and I'm able to make them out. You know, and then in 30 seconds they'll change from a dark brown or aluminum color, because I have some aluminum insulation. They'll turn bright green, and my little friend's hopping around right there now, listening as I'm describing them. I'll send you a couple of pictures. They're really wonderful. And we keep 3 tanks. One is what I call the vivarium, and it has these 3 anole lizards, giant earthworms, beetles, crickets, and I fell in love with the crickets. So they used to get eaten up by the old gecko that I had before he passed away, so we'd have cricket songs in the house all the time, and then it would diminish as they were eaten away. So I decided to have a cricketarium. So I have a tank with crickets, and then we have a tank with beetles. So we have the vivarium, the beetlarium, and the cricketarium. But it's wonderful. You see, the purpose of this for me is pursuing the idea of interspecies communication. And what I've found is that I can communicate with these different species. I communicate with the reptiles by sound and by touch. I approach them and I start to make contact very gently with my finger on their little hand. I can't call it a claw. It looks more like a hand. And I touch them, and then they get over their fear of touch. And then I start to communicate, and my communication is very simple. I'll touch them once, then I'll touch them twice, then 3 times, then 4 times, then 5 times. So I'm teaching them how to count. That's the basic communication. Then there's I have one of them who will climb up right on my hand and interact with me and is totally fearless. And there's one who's macho, and he's like, oh, don't embarrass me in front of the girls. You know, that kind of girl puffs up his chin. And like, I'm a tough guy, don't mess with me. And then there's the crickets. And the crickets are a very admirable society, I'll tell you. They're very gentle, they're very caring, they help each other. And something that my girlfriend and I have seen several times is the death of a cricket. And when a cricket is dying, the other crickets gather around them, and they become very nurturing, comforting. They almost seem like they sit around and pray. Again, projection of what it would look like. You know, we go to wakes, for people who have passed away.
Right.
And then it seems that the crickets do this as well. Another interesting thing to see is a cricket coming out of the pupa stage, getting out of the shell, struggling out. And they come out perfectly, beautifully white, just nothing, just, albino. And when crickets see another one trying to birth, they come over and they start yanking on the shell and helping them get out. It's a very, very beautiful thing to see. And I think humans should study crickets.
Well, you're explaining this. I'm thinking to myself, they have a consciousness and awareness.
Oh, they do, and they're very gentle. They're not, they're not vermin in any way. Like people consider roaches and water bugs, and people look on bees and hornets and things like that, as enemies, and I don't. I actually have a rapport with bees and wasps, yellow jackets, and I have photographs of myself at a lake up here in upstate New York where I was drinking 7-Up, and a yellow jacket came up and sat on the bottle. So I took a bottle cap and filled it with 7-Up and put it on my hand, and they all gathered around, and I have a picture of my hand with about 10 yellow jackets on my hand. And some fellow came up and said, "Hey, man, yeah, be careful. They'll sting you." I said, "No, they're not going to sting me. They know I'm their friend.
Yeah.
And the way they know is my vibe and my scent. Animals react to your fear.
Right.
They smell your fear and they go, oh, this guy is afraid of something. So he must be bad." So I've learned not to fear animals, and you know what? It takes people aback. Here in New York, there's a whole dog cult. I think that the priesthood of Anubis, the dog god of Egypt, settled in the West Side, and they just love their dogs like they do children, and they also love their dogs like they like guns. They walk around with these Doberman pinchers and pit bulls that they want them to be really menacing. And the dog will come over to me, and I go, "Hey, boy, how you doing?" I put my hand out so he can smell it, and the dog starts wagging his tail and acting friendly. And the owner, who wants them to be menacing and protective, is flabbergasted, because animals really do know the good,
Yeah.
the bad, and the ugly, and the beautiful. And if you're not hostile, aggressive, or fearful with an animal, you can attain a rapport. I have a nice little story for you just on this theme. I have many Tai Chi students who have studied with me for many years, and we hang out, we do things. And one day, my friend Alan said, I want to go and buy some flowers for somebody. So let's go over. So there's a florist over here. So we went into the shop, and the guy kept a German Shepherd as a watchdog, and he's always on guard. He was a kind of a edgy dog. So my friend and I go in. He buys a dozen roses, and we know I'm looking at the dog, and the dog's on like, that kind of thing, like not acting very friendly, but I'm giving him good vibes. It doesn't bother me. And we walk out. I went first. My friend was behind me. And when we went to the door, the dog bolted. And he went to attack my friend. My friend had the flowers in his hands, and he heard the dog coming, and he very gracefully just turned around, and he put the flowers in the dog's nose, and the dog smelled the roses and went, woo, and he just took off. And that's all my friend did. No fear, nothing, just instant reaction. Just show him the flowers. So when the dog smelled the roses, his whole mindset changed, from being aggressive. Like, he went into cognitive dissonance. He didn't know what the heck to do. He felt like I should attack this bad guy, but the roses turned him around, and he just went running off the other way. It was a very, very enjoyable experience.
Robert, you're talking about the dogs, and you're talking about the crickets, and and it just, not to sidetrack a little bit here, but it just reinforces how disconnected humanity is to connectedness. We're all part of this one world, and it's in this creation, and people are just so separated. And I see you have a cat.
Yeah. He's been insisting. He's been yakking around. I'm sure you've heard him. So I would introduce you.
Yeah, pick him up.
This is Lancelot.
Okay, yeah, pick his head up a little bit so we can see him.
Oh, that's all right. I can't see myself. That's the problem.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a bunch of animals. Mike has a bunch of animals. My whole family, we're all animal lovers, so I know. I agree with everything you just said.
Oh, yeah. I tell my Tai Chi students, listen, man, you should come and study with me. I'm going to teach you two things. I'm going to teach you how to move like a cat, and I'm going to teach you how to think like a cat.
Yeah.
Think like a cat? Yeah. No words. It's fascinating. From kittens, cats are hardwired with a certain body of knowledge, and that knowledge guides them to the right place, and I started practicing that. I say, cats make instantaneous decisions, and never a word crosses their minds. Cat words, maybe they exist, but whatever process it is, it's a nonverbal process to us. And my teachers, my Tai Chi teachers and Kung Fu teachers, taught me that you have to quiet down what the Buddhists call the barking dog. It's that the incessant conversationalist. It's always yakking in the middle, like their voices going on in your head. You have to shut them down. And one of the ways is to clear your mind of all words. It's very difficult to think of nothing, right? And you might succeed, It's very difficult for most people to get into that state, to just stop the verbal centers, these two areas here, the Brodmann area, the Wernicke areas of the brain, and just shut them down. And then you have access to that other 90%.
Yes.
Brain and of your being, But it's a difficult thing to just silence all of that. And the funny thing is this, it happens. You start practicing, you start breathing, you start clearing your mind, and all of a sudden you go blank and you have no words happening in your brain. And then you go, wow, I was thinking without words. And then the words come back, and then you banish them again. Wow, I did it, for about 10 seconds, and then 15 seconds. And then I get into that state. I can do it more regularly. If it's a physical thing that I'm doing, like sports, martial arts, when you're doing martial arts, self-defense, you don't want a single word going through your head. You don't want to describe your opponent. You don't want to think about what you're going to do. You just have to be clear and act. Not react. Act.
Right.
Right? Seize the initiative. And no talking. You're not going to catch me talking with anybody that I'm having a fight with. Because then you're already behind. You see, words are an echo. They are in the past. And to be in the moment, it's a nonverbal perception.
And that concludes part 1 of our interview with Robert Morningstar, and I hope you enjoyed the discussion as much as we did. Please look for part 2 of our conversation, which will be uploaded to YouTube shortly. And as always, I'd like to thank everyone for listening and visiting the blog. You can get there by typing in sageofquayradio.blogspot.com, or simply head over to our hub website at sageofquay.com. Also, if you get a moment, please visit laboroflovemusic.com to listen to my album, Leaving Dystopia. And remember, live in truth and always serve creation. It's really that simple. See everyone next week. Be safe, enjoy, and God bless.